The Secrets of Technology is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Technology. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Technology, where we discuss the technology news that's important to you from a uniquely Catholic point of view. And joining me today on the panel are Thomas Sanjurjo. Hi, Thomas.
Hey, Dom. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. And Pat Scott. Hello, Pat.
Greetings.
So we're going to be continuing to talk about the same thing we're all talking about, but from the technology standpoint. And there's some important user-based information out there. There's some stuff in the news that's being reported by the mainstream news that may not be they may not be doing such a great job of reporting on it. So we're going to try to wade through some of that and get to whatever the actual information is. And we may not have all the answers, but we're going to kind of parse through it. The first thing is this is a brief story about Facebook. Facebook has announced that it's going to be working with Carnegie Mellon University research project to connect with the Facebook users to take their survey on self-reported coronavirus infections. So, and apparently Google was doing the same thing too, which is basically just soliciting their users to take the survey. What do you think? Is this anything someone should be concerned about, that Facebook is getting data, or Google, or what do you think, Thomas?
I mean, anytime you give Facebook data, you kind of have to worry about it. but no, I think in this case, this is one of those areas where big data is really going to work in our benefit. Like this is a proof positive that it is important for us to be on top of how to use big data, and for us to make sure that we're doing it, first off, voluntarily, which I like that's a big part of all of the things we're going to talk about right now. They're all voluntary. Right. To a degree, or to some degree or another, but they are voluntary contributions from people, and it helps when we are all voluntarily contributing to that information.
That's right. Yeah, that's the big thing. Is they said that you'll go to your Facebook feed. At the top there'll be a link. Hey, take the survey, and all they're doing is just sending you to the survey site that's hosted elsewhere. And you take the survey. They're not sharing your information with Carnegie Mellon, and Carnegie Mellon won't be reporting back. So as far as they all say. Pat, what do you think of this? Is this something you think you could encourage people to do if it pops up on their page?
Yeah, I'm again a little bit leery of Facebook's involvement. I had already signed up for a voluntary self-reporting app through another company, Eureka. And I've been doing that on a daily basis, and it's not that big a deal. I don't mind the types of questions they're asking. So if that's all that Facebook is doing, and there would be repercussions if they use it for something else later on down the line, I think I could go behind it.
Okay. So as a similar question of big data came up, and this is a bit of a bigger one, which is Apple and Google are collaborating. Some would say conspiring, but they're not. They're collaborating on a way to set up Android and iOS phones to do what's called contact tracing. So first, what's contact tracing? It's an important tool that's used in fighting a pandemic, which is if we find out someone has the disease, we need to find out everyone they were in contact with when they were contagious. And with a disease like this one, where you can be contagious for a long time before you have symptoms, it's especially important. That's a very labor-intensive and can be an inaccurate process, because you've got to sit down with each person who's sick and find out everyone they were near over the past, 14 days potentially. So what they're trying to do is apply technology to the problem. And so here's the description, and we can get into the upsides and the potential problems in it. But it's intended to be voluntary, so it would not be put on your phone against your will. You'd have to opt in. You'd have to download an app. They're making an API, a programming interface, not apps. Apple is not going to download an app to your phone or put it in the operating system. Google is not going to download it. There will be parts of this in the operating system. I think that's right. That will to make this work. Apps will have to be created by third parties, probably government health agencies like the CDC or whatnot. So, and Apple and Google will help them with that. Here's basically how it works. Every day, your phone will generate a unique Bluetooth identifier. Bluetooth is that short-range, low-power connection utility. So every day, a unique identifier for you. Every 15 minutes, it'll create a new tracking ID that combines your location and your daily identifier. As you move around, everyone you come into proximity with who's also running the tracker will capture that 15-minute tracking identifier and vice versa. And then if you eventually test positive, then they will go back and there'll be a database and they'll say, okay, who has this identifier been in contact with over the past 14 days? And then we'll send out an alert to all those people, and they will receive alert. These are what you should do next, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so it's unclear exactly how the identifying and contacting will work. We're not quite sure of this, but so far, does that sound about right? Does that sound does that sound fairly private? We can get into the problems, but it sounds like it addresses most of our concerns about privacy and also being voluntary, right?
Yes and no.
Well, what do you think, Thomas?
Bluetooth technology is great, first off, and Bluetooth technology is the way to go for this. It's very secure. It's the way they're talking about doing it is by generating a new identifier at the beginning of each day, and then basically you're just going to be aggregating a group of those identifiers as you go through your day, and it will be useless to everyone except for someone who has access to a way to decode those identifiers. The problem is that they're also going to have to be handing over a way to decode those identifiers to whoever
who's in charge
the app is working with. Yeah, so
Right.
whoever and that's the government that you're handing it over to. So, and I always, with this kind of thing, I always go back to the essay that was written about, identifying the original revolutionaries of the U.S. only by metadata, only by the groups that they were involved with.
Right.
And you could identify a few key men that if you had just arrested them, then the revolution never would have gotten off the ground.
Right.
And so you have a very similar problem here that could be the way that it is used. My other really big concern, and this is the really interesting one, is how this is going to work along with HIPAA laws, because medical privacy is really important, and if your identifier is what is going to attach you to all of these other people, I'm wondering how they're going to keep private that information. And I know
Right.
there's ways that they can do it, but it's really interesting to think that what they're doing is they're reporting based off of someone's medical condition. They're now going and finding all the people that they were in contact with.
Right.
And trying to say, hey, you were in contact with a person that has now tested positive for COVID-19. You need to come in and get tested. So I don't know.
my guess is they're not going to say who you were in contact with, just
Right.
that you were, which can create a little fear, but such is the nature of the privacy, I guess. Pat, what do you think so far? Like, is this sound like it's at least in concept, something that could work to protect our privacy, but also our health?
I think it's probably a better solution than just the occasional self-reporting by some people. I think that this sounds like it's something that could be automated, as I say, voluntarily opt-in, but I don't see much downside. You do want to protect the privacy. I think they're trying to address that as carefully as they can. But you also have to assume that during an epidemic or something like that, you've got to relax it to protect the whole.
Right.
I know I worked for the health department, and we had cases where we had to track STDs, venereal disease and all sorts of things. And you, at some point, have to say to the person, yes, you've got this condition, and for your safety and for the people that you care about, this has to be done. You've got to deal with it. And, I think it's a similar thing.
So one of the things that they're saying is that this is how we're going to need this to come out of shelter in place. And this isn't going to happen right away. It takes time to develop technology, write software, make apps. And so this is going to be something for, like, when we come out of shelter in place or lockdown, whatever you want to call it, we're going to need to have a way where if someone is infected, we don't have another big outbreak again. And that's the goal of this. Contact tracing has always been a key to that, and that's why they want to do it. I think the estimate is only 5% of us will have immunity after we emerge from our holes in May or June or whenever that is. There won't be a vaccine available yet. This is our safeguard. People point to places like Korea, South Korea, China, Singapore that have implemented this in a non-voluntary, mandatory fashion. Right. And to South Korea, apparently it's worked pretty well. There's some question about whether it actually works very well at all in China, for instance, given the lack of information they're letting out. So some people are worried. Well, that's one of the problems. Some people are worried that making it voluntary may not get enough people on board for it to really work. Is that a valid concern, and do we need to address that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have it, but then no one that you come in contact with does, then it hasn't really done any good.
Right.
And so there is definitely a limitation to it. But, we talk about those tile trackers all the time and how yep. they've been, using those to find items around. It's a similar kind of thing. And so I think that they're doing it with as much security practice in mind as they possibly can.
Right.
And, it doesn't smell wrong. And that's, if it doesn't smell wrong to me, that's a big deal for me to say it doesn't smell wrong.
Yeah. That actually makes me feel good if you think it doesn't smell wrong. All right, so let's get to some of the specific questions that some security researchers have brought up. Some potential things that have to be considered. These are not actually necessarily problems now, but could be problems depending on how it's implemented. So one of the things that some have mentioned is all of the devices, every phone, would have to download the database of tracking identifiers because it needs to recognize them, and that could be hundreds of gigabytes of data potentially, or at least megabytes of data, not hundreds of gigabytes. Every phone would be full, but hundreds of megabytes of data, which can be substantial. So in order to avoid that, they might have to say, okay, we're going to just download a subset based on your location, which means we have a more granular information about your location. So that problem has to be solved, right?
I don't think so. I think you could do this as sort of implementing a small version of a public-private access key pair.
Okay.
And so this gets kind of deep into the weeds of security and stuff, but you could feasibly do this by attaching a unique identifier to a location and then just keeping a small database set of all the people that you come in touch with. So your Bluetooth starts off the day, it gives you the identifier, and then as you go to the store, you walk by someone that also has the app on, and it just grabs their number that's happening at that particular time.
Okay.
And it's just a small string of data, so the file wouldn't get very large. And then you can even have it set up so that at the end of the day, it stores to the cloud, and that day is done, and then the next day you get a fresh one. So you're talking in the range of maybe kilobytes, maybe a meg, if you went a lot of places and collected a lot of data.
So keeping everything in the cloud as much as possible as opposed to storing it on the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things someone brought up was the potential of false data, false positives. So, for example, they'd have to keep false information from being loaded into the database. Like, so someone potentially, some malicious jerk who loads thousands of contacts in for the fun of it, creating basically sort of a denial of service situation almost with the database and uploading gigabytes of data. So that's something that they would have to account for. They'd have to have security in place to prevent that.
Yeah.
So that would be a concern. And they also have to keep out false positive alerts so they have it so that someone can't figure out a way to say, oh, this number, this identifier is a positive, and then alerting a bunch of people that they were infected, potentially infected or exposed to a symptomatic person falsely, and that would again overwhelm the system of people freaking out. So that's another one to be concerned with. And then which again, solvable problems. Those are definitely solvable problems. And then one of the things people said, how do we keep advertisers from minding this API? So, because this is gold information for advertisers. Who you come in contact with and where you go every day with your phone, that's a demographic gold for people trying to sell stuff.
Yeah, I think out of all of my concerns, my biggest concern is the fact that this is now an API.
Yes.
And that just means that it's usable. And so it's like it's changing a fundamental feature of the phone so that your contact data is usable in some way like this.
Right.
And that's concerning, but it can be worked around. Yeah, and it is voluntary. And so again, everybody be hyper vigilant about what kind of access your app is asking for. If you're downloading a game and it's asking for access to your Bluetooth, you should wonder why it's asking for access to your Bluetooth.
Yes,
you know?
Yes. And keep up with the news. Well, like we will, and we'll keep reporting it here. If and when this goes live, there'll be security researchers hammering this, making sure that it's not doing the things that it shouldn't be doing. And as soon as it comes out that, if it did come out that someone was misusing it, we'd all find out about it, and we'd all delete the app, and we'd be done with it, and that sort of thing. So that would be important to recognize. Couple important things, or additional bits of information is that Apple obviously can push the API, the framework out in an operating system update, and they have very good adoption rates when they push out security updates. Google has said, because for Android, sometimes that people complain that you can't get updates until the carriers push them. That's often a problem. Google said they will push this as this is more fundamental level update that they send out from themselves to the phones, and they would push it as that. So that would be a good way to get around that problem. So very interesting. Again, not something that's going to roll out in a week or a month. It's probably longer than that. So there's something to keep an eye on.
One comment I had was, you talked about it being voluntary, and if not very many people did it, that could be a problem. I was reading somewhere that the CDC said that they had expected a lot of their projections were based upon people 50% being, adhering to stay-at-home policies, and they're finding it's closer to 80%.
Wow. That
people are very, very, high in adopting this. We're going to stay in place. Yeah. So, there are the 20% that are grumblers and out on the beach, et cetera. But, to me, just looking around Austin, I see a high rate of compliance from the people I come into contact with. So I'm real hopeful that this will be a very good method of tracking.
I think in general, people have responded to all of this in a very responsible way. That that people are in general, they understand the necessity for doing things that need to be done to safeguard all of us, and are appropriately wary and vigilant, in expressing their vigilance about overreach by government officials or others too. So that I'm hopeful in that to see those paired. That's a good point. I think we hopefully can expect a high compliant opt-in rate. So let's move into a different aspect of technology and the current situation. Then for our next segment, the challenges for online learning, and I know this is close to home for you, Thomas, especially
yes, very much
as a teacher. So the New York Times had an article talking about some of the challenges that have been faced by schools and students. As the headline is, as schools move online, many students stay logged out. A quote from the article: the absence rate appears particularly high in schools with many low-income students whose access to home computers and internet connections can be spotty. Some teachers report that fewer than half of their students are regularly participating. How's it going for you, Thomas, for your school?
It's been really good for us. And I think a lot of that is because we got way out ahead of this and we're ready for it before it happened. We were already moving to the point where we were nearly a one-to-one school, all the way down through fourth grade. So 8th grade down through fourth grade, we were one-to-one. And we were prepping to get accounts for the third graders, second graders, all the way down to the first graders. And basically, this just pushed us to make sure that we also had the pre-kindergarten kids have their own accounts. And so we just, bought up a whole bunch of extra Microsoft accounts, and we're ready to go. So we were, I am very proud of my school. Nativity Catholic School in Brandon, Florida has done a fantastic job of, and it is exemplary in the way that they've handled this. And I think that takes a lot of burden off of it. So, we sent kids home. Any kid that had a problem with technology, especially multi-family kids, or multi-kid families, they needed to take home some piece of equipment that they could use. So we sent a lot of our pieces of equipment home with them, so they were ready to go. Some of the struggle has been finding, what kids have what. So as the technology teacher, I want to give typing lessons to the kids while they're at home, but a lot of them are using iPads, so that doesn't work. But then the turn of that is that I have one girl who is she's one of her hands doesn't work very well for typing, and I found a typing program that she can do at home that teaches her how to right hand type, and she does a fantastic job with it. Wow. So it's been it's been a mixed bag of really good and really bad. But the area that we're in, I have heard so many horror stories about the districts not having kids have access, or if the kids have access, they're just not logging on. And I'll tell you one story from ours. Our poor deacon, he's doing weekly reflections, and he's very sad about the numbers that have been coming through for the views on his reflections. And so we're working on trying to figure out how to encourage the kids to make sure that they're watching the reflections. And that they're staying involved in the things that they're supposed to be involved in, and that is part of being a Catholic school.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting aspect of it from a Catholic school perspective. It's not just the homework, but it's also the faith elements that they should be taking part in too. That's true. That's very true. Pat, have you seen much of to do with kids and schooling with your work?
No, but one of the things that at least Austin, it's all across Texas. They have taken school buses and put Wi-Fi hotspots in them, and are putting them in the low income areas, and as well as, of course, they're doing, like you were suggesting, is sending home devices with a lot of the lower income. I don't think it's going to take care of everybody, but I know one of my cousins said, "What the heck is this school bus doing beeping its horn at 10 a.m. this morning?" And we were able to tell her, "Hey, it's for the kids in your apartments that need to get access. They can, it's a very strong Wi-Fi, and they can get access through that."
Oh, cool.
So that's one really positive thing I've seen. I haven't heard much from the teachers that are in my clients and people that I deal with about low absentee rates, but I'm sure that there's got to be a lot of people that maybe have one device at home.
Yeah.
And so they've got to take turns with the kids with the device.
Or they don't have great Wi-Fi, high speed, and they've got multiple devices all trying to get online.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of that, but there have been several of the schools around town that put strong Wi-Fi's right on the edge of their campus and said to the parents, "Drive on up."
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's another method that they're using.
Interesting.
So they're trying.
Yeah, I guess in Miami-Dade, they've distributed more than 80,000. They said mobile devices, so probably iPads and Chromebooks and laptops, and more than 11,000 smartphones that can serve as hotspots. Not for phone use, but to be a hotspot to get those online, which is interesting. I think this is part of the 5G rollout. And I think we need to start. It proves the need to get a technology into laptops and iPads and things that really get us online without having to rely on a local Wi-Fi router that gets us beyond that. There are benefits to having a local network, which I agree with, and I'm not sure I'd want to try to do this podcast solely over a cell signal of some sort. But there is that. I think we need to kind of, if we can get every phone online without a Wi-Fi hotspot, we should be able to get every tablet, every net Chromebook or light laptop or something for kids. I think we're gathering a lot of information in this crisis, and there's going to be a lot of seminars, a lot of papers written, and a lot of public policy debates in the next several years about lessons learned. And this, I think, it's going to evolve.
Definitely.
This.
Well, and then one of the things that I did run across was one of my clients. She's retired, but she lives in a little community that does, her Wi-Fi and her internet, when I try to help her, is even worse than molasses. It's more like a glacial speed. So, out in their area, they don't have very good internet to begin with, much less trying to do video. So I can see where the rural areas, they've been talking about it for a long time. How can we get it out to the rural areas? This has got to be pushing this.
Yeah.
There's been some bills proposed in Congress to take some of the Rural Telecommunications Act money. There's a little bit of tax on every one of your phone bills to help pay for rural telephone service, to add another tax on it to pay for extending broadband everywhere, which, I would normally say another tax, but, we're kind of proving the fact that we need this this is infrastructure, like a road and water pipes and sewer pipes. We need internet pipes. It's just,
what about those satellites that had been put up to hopefully get internet everywhere? That was the goal.
Yeah.
I don't know where we are on that and how it stands.
I think
it's still got a few more deployments. Yeah, and they haven't gotten near finished with that. But this is there's some other technologies that we don't talk about a lot, and a mesh network is one that comes up a lot, and it has a lot of hurdles, and it's a totally different way of doing things. But this is looking more and more like a reason for us to do that, to just have a mesh network that doesn't rely on this centralized infrastructure. Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of it because I'm all about free access. But I think that it's one of those things that we need to really start thinking about and pushing for. And the technology is getting to a point where it's catching up to all of the challenges that it would present. Whether that'll be something that comes out of this, I don't know. But I would love to see that be a part of the conversation.
Public Wi-Fi run by towns was a big thing like 15, 20 years ago and kind of faded. Like it kind of went away, I think, because a lot of towns didn't want the hassle. They realized that what a hassle was to maintain these networks and secure the networks. And so they kind of did away with it. But like, especially when we're talking about allowing low income people to get online easier, they tend to also live in more densely populated areas, which are perfect for mesh.
Right. That's exactly. And that's exactly where you would make a good argument for it is, lower income in inner city type areas, apartment buildings, like you were saying with the bus being there. And then the other end of that whole conversation too is just when you're talking about people needing to connect and they don't have the access to. We need to figure out what that's going to look like. Like, how can we get packets of information to people without needing to be on a constant stream? And then I have to say this, go make sure that when all of this is said and done, you hug your IT person because, and it's the thing that kills me, because if everything's going well, you don't think about the IT person. Right. But as soon as something like this happens, or as soon as something happens that's a critical situation, your IT or security suite, whatever it is, they are the ones that are making sure everything keeps working.
Right.
And man, they are, I'll tell you, my workload going home, you would think, I'm the elective class. All my kids are dealing with technology all the time. I don't really need to teach much anymore, right? I'm done. I am doing 3 times the amount of work that I was. And it's just in coaching all the other teachers, as well as the students, as well as answering tickets and making sure that I'm keeping people connected. So it's a lot of work. And when we get back to whatever normal looks like after this, make sure that everyone is, patting the IT person on the back and saying, good job.
A resource where somebody is essential when you don't notice them when things are going well, and you're cursing their name when things aren't.
Exactly.
Well, and I have been so encouraged that I figured when this first started out, this is going to overload the internet. Zoom servers are going to be down.
Yeah.
I am not seeing that. I am seeing things a little slower, but not like it's brought to its knees slow.
Resilient.
And I've just been really encouraged.
Yes, the internet has been resilient through all this. I'm astonished that knock on wood, how good Skype has been. We rely on Skype to do our podcasts, but how reliant so many of the services that we use every day have been. They've held up. They're working well. It is actually astonishing how well things are going. And yes, kudos to all those sysadmins, IT techs, all of the servers techs, like in the big server farms, doing a great job. Yes.
Well, this reminds me of Y2K, which I am older than you guys, so I was part of the Y2K conversion. And after that all happened, people said, see, there wasn't a problem. There was not a problem. This was all made such a big deal. And we said, you don't know the thousands and thousands of hours people put on this voluntarily and, underpaid, etc.
Yep.
But, it was a huge effort, and that's why it wasn't noticed.
Right. Again, kudos to those people from 20 years ago who did such a good job that nothing broke, like almost nothing. What a amazing, that should be recognized as an accomplishment, that so many programs, so many computers had this problem. And there was I remember there was an ATM network in New Zealand that went down on at the turn of the midnight, and that was it. It was amazing. Yeah. And again, we're kudos again to our techies who are doing such a great job. The geeks rule.
By the way, there were some systems that didn't get converted way back then. I found an online COBOL course for anybody who has to pick up after one of those.
Yeah, that's a big deal right now. If you haven't heard, that's a big deal right now.
I know.
Yeah, the unemployment office.
New Jersey's unemployment office runs on COBOL.
Right. And in fact, I was my generation was the COBOL programmers, and we were laughing, saying, we don't have our manuals anymore. But then, as I say, I found an online manual and a class on how to learn COBOL. So I feel like maybe New Jersey could find that out off of GitHub.
That is a perfect segue to our next segment. We're going to talk about some headlines. And the first headline is about digital hoarding and how our terabytes are being put to use for the betterment of mankind. This is an Ars Technica story. And it says that it tells, we all know about the Internet Archive, archive.org. If you're looking for a website that's gone offline or changed, you're going to find it's your best bet. It's not that it's guaranteed, but your best bet is you'll find it at at archive.org. I've used it actually to find parts of my own personal website that's over 20 years old that got corrupted 5 years ago or something. And I'm like, oh, well, gosh, I hope it's in the Internet Archive, and I go back and find it. So in addition to the Internet Archive, there's something else called a Reddit subreddit called Data Hoarder, where there are people whose hobby it is to just gather all kinds of stuff, and anything and everything you can imagine that can be gathered. Including, one of the things I love is that YouTube has become a place to go when you're looking for a TV commercial that used to be on when you were 5, or when I was 5, never mind. In fact, I literally did that today. That came up with my wife Melanie and I. We were remembering this old TV commercial for a local furniture company here in the Boston area called Dean's Home Furniture. And the tagline, the guy had the most Boston accent ever, the Dean, and he would end his every ad with, "Can you get that at those big fancy stores? I doubt it." He would say it like that, and I'm like, and the kids are like, "What?" So I had to go find it. Yes, it's on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. So people are hoarding things, and so the question I want to kind of put to you is some people say, "Oh, we shouldn't hoard things. We should, our computers, we should keep them clean. We should clear out the digital cruft, get rid of old files, get rid of old emails, stop, keeping all that stuff hanging around. We should have a detachment, digital detachment. Is that okay? Or is it okay to hold on to old data? What do you think? What's your opinion?
Well, usually it's after somebody has gone through that process, then I'm called in because they accidentally got rid of stuff they didn't mean to. So I tell people before I ever convert a machine to a new machine, they'll say, "Oh, I'll go clean up." I'll say, no, let me back it up.
Right.
And then, at that point, give them a backup of all their stuff. So I guess I feel like, yeah, I can get rid of all the old ads. I can get rid of all of the promotional things. But I keep almost all work-related and and especially family-related emails and texts and stuff like that. There's a lot I've gone back to look for.
I think archiving is important. And if you're a minimalist, I'm a minimalist. I like keeping things very clean and very minimal. But that means that I spend more time organizing things. And that's what's so important. And, my librarian wife would say, why would you not keep things? It's so the barrier to keeping things is so low digitally.
Right.
It's just go buy another hard drive. It's going to cost you maybe $10, and just if it's bothering you that much, just take everything and dump it on that hard drive and then forget about
clean
it.
Up.
Yeah, exactly. Until you need it, because then, a week later you're going to go, oh man, where's that file? And you're going to go, it's on that hard drive that I just bought for $10, So that, and I think that's the way to that's the way to think about it is one, keep yourself organized, date things, put the date on a file. And this is something that I teach my students with graphic design, especially. When you're sitting there working on a project, if you put the date on it, you're going to work with the client, and they're going to ask you to change something, They're going to do 10 changes, and then they're going to go, that first one you gave me, I really liked that one. Could we just go back to that? And if you've been saving on the same file the whole time, you're going to have to redo it. Whereas if you've dated them all, you just pull the one back up and you say, it took me a couple hours to get back to that one, so I got to charge you for that. But no, you kept the file. So,
yes, date it and make it and work from a new copy.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Put the date in the title of the file, in the file name. Don't rely on the metadata on the file.
Bingo. Because
that can get corrupted. Put it in the name. So I'm a data hoarder. I guess I don't have a problem with that. I've been using Evernote for over a dozen years now. I have 22,202 notes in my Evernote database.
Nice.
All tagged, all in nice directories and folders. I have kept every episode of every podcast that we've ever done, including the original audio files and the edited audio files that we've ever done under my tenure as first executive director and now CEO at StarQuest. But I've got it on a NAS drive next to me, and that's backed up into an Amazon S3 server, or Glacier, really, which is their deep freeze server. I am obsessive about both archival and backup, and that goes back to my obsession. And I've probably mentioned before, goes back to the time that I had all of my grad school papers on a zip disk that got the zip click of death and died and lost them all. And now so I agree. I think
if it doesn't exist in three places, it doesn't exist.
Exactly. So I agree. I think keeping things is fine. Hard drives are big. Hard drive space is cheap. Put it in the cloud, put it in various places. But one of the things I love about this story is that, as it says in the story, the subreddit called R Data Hoarder, this ain't the grant and partnerships funded, well-coordinated operation of the Internet Archive. It's the individual, obsession-driven R Data Hoarder. And that's one of the great things about the Internet is it's about individuals. So a researcher who's looking for some particular set of data goes here and says, hey, anyone have an archive of this, tweets about blank historical thing? And someone will pop up and go, I have that, because of course, there's someone who's got an interest in everything. And I love the distributed nature of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you do too, Thomas.
Oh yeah, it's the Wikipedia, right? It's the Wikipedia of data hoarding, basically, and the entire bent of Wikipedia is that everyone is interested in something enough to be obsessive about it.
Yes.
Well, and I like the fact that it's almost like we've got all of these mini historians that each have their own specialty and their own fanaticism and their own way of doing it, but they're interested in history.
Yep.
And
right.
I think that's something that, we tend to say, well, history, so what? Well, there's a reason.
Exactly. And my pick of the week is going to have a connection to that. So thank you for bringing that up, because there is an interesting connection to my pick. So I want to get into some news that broke today as we record this, and it was not a surprise. It was expected. Apple officially unveiled the long rumored iPhone 9 which was being called, but they're calling it the iPhone SE, the 2020 version. They're low cost or budget or whatever phone, and it basically, the way it's being positioned is it comes at a mid-range Android phone price with iPhone 11 internals, which actually has led some people to say, well, that means the iPhone 11 is overpriced, which perhaps it is, but that's not just because of that. I mean, there are other factors involved that make this different from an iPhone 11. It's not exactly the same thing. But what do you guys think? Have you looked at the stories and seen the specs on it? What do you think of this new phone? Pat, you have experience with both Android and iPhone?
Right, and I've got a lot of clients for whom that higher end iPhone is just out of their range, and this opens that up to a lot of my clients and says, well, I've got to have a phone, but I'm keeping my flip phone because I just can't afford a smartphone. This makes this much closer in range. And I think you're going to, they were saying that they didn't think that this was going to have that high of sales. I've had people waiting for this phone.
Oh, yeah.
Wanting it to come back.
Yeah. This is, it starts at $399 for a 64 gig phone.
That's great.
And goes up
fantastic.
to $549 for a 256, which is more than even I need. Frankly, I don't need 256, but yeah. What do you think, Thomas?
I'm impressed. I'll say that the one thing that I've always liked about iPhones is the experience is very nice. It's a very pleasant phone. I was worried about them doing a budget phone, but Apple's never going to let the internals be bad. So really, what they've done is they've just cut the bells and whistles. So they've taken the really high end like camera and some of the screen functions and some of the other things that really make the iPhone 11 just stand out, flagship type phone. And they've just pared them down to equivalent versions of what you would get on a $400 phone.
Right.
And it's good. And the experience is going to be the same as an iPhone. So if you like the iPhone experience, but you don't want to pay $1,000 for it, this is the way to go.
Yeah. One of the big differences is the camera. It's got a single sensor on the back, a single lens on the back instead of 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 dozen. Like the high-end phones have these days. It's Touch ID instead of Face ID, so that reduces some of the. And frankly, I know people who prefer Touch ID over Face ID. They like that experience better. So there's that, and it's got decent battery life, and so I'm looking at this and thinking, at some point, my daughter has my old iPhone 6 that she left sitting on the floor of her bedroom and stepped on. So the screen is cracked, and I'm waiting the day that we could just get screens replaced. That's somehow they're not doing that at the moment. But it's not on it's not on a phone plan. We just use it sort of like a fancy iPod Touch, basically. At this point, she doesn't have a reason to have a phone yet. But she's 14 or next month. Wow. Sorry, just had that dad realization.
Yeah, mine's 15 in a couple, so I know that feeling.
Yes. So, but I'm thinking, like, there's going to come a point not too long where I think I'm going to need to get her a new phone. And wow, this is, and maybe if I can get a refurb down the line a bit, when the refurbs come out, you can usually get refurb phones about 60 to 90 days after they're initially released. That might be something to consider down the line. I mean, but $399, that's a really good, really interesting price point for an iPhone. That's definitely. So I agree. I like this phone. I think it's a great idea. Again, if my mom needed a new phone, I think she has the last iPhone SE, so it's pretty dated. This would be a good phone for her. This would certainly, because it's a bigger screen than the last iPhone SE as well. And it's not as big as the flagship phones, which some people have been holding off from because of that.
Well, and I will say too, like, I don't buy flagship Android phones because they don't perform well. They have excellent specs. Like all of the Samsung phones that I've owned have been terrible. All of the other big name phones that I've had. So I go with the Motorola's, and I get like the midline Motorola phones.
Yeah.
And they work. They're workhorses. They're great phones. They're really snappy. And that is the price point that I pay.
Yep.
Like the $299 to $399 range.
A couple other things that folks may have seen in the headlines. Better Business Bureau, some police departments have all been kind of warning people lately, stop taking Facebook quizzes that name your favorite whatever or your childhood whatever. And another one I saw is don't post your yearbook photo with your high school and year of graduation. All this is about don't give out personally identifiable information that can be used to social engineer passwords. That's a big aspect of it, or steal your identity. You think this is overcautious, or does this make sense?
Please stop taking Facebook quizzes that ask you personal questions.
I would like to see them banned. I really would, because, I look at all of the questions that my clients are having to answer for security, for cable, for all these things.
Right.
That's where a lot of those questions would be very helpful for the bad guys.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and not even that. Let's just go beyond the. Well, I never answered a question like that. Okay, well, a spear phishing campaign is going to do exactly that. They're going to ask all these questions, and then they're going to gather all that data, and then they're going to find somebody, and they're going to make a fake profile that says that they graduated from that high school at around that same time that you did, and they're going to contact you and say, "Hey, do you remember me? We were in this class together," because it's not hard to find the teachers' names who were teaching there at the time.
Yeah,
and you're done. And that's it. They're gonna wheedle their way into your life, and they're gonna get information about you that you didn't think you were gonna give.
Yeah,
and that's how easy it is.
Bill Murray did it in Groundhog Day in 1993.
I remember
before the internet was big. so yeah. Well, and they've got your graduation photo that they can use as your throwback profile photo, and that's true. One of the things I do when I fill out security questions, I mentioned this before, I don't put the actual information there. I generate random dictionary words in my password manager and put that in there, and then record what the answer was in the password manager in a secure place. Don't give the bad guys any vectors to get your data. That's just don't. Keep yourself safe. I agree. And just don't play the silly games. Do this at Thanksgiving dinner with your family next time when we can do such things again. But don't do this on the internet.
And just so everyone's clear, we are talking about the ones that give you like a list of things and say, "Oh, pick the birth, the month that you were born in," and like all of that kind of stuff. Just none of it. Don't participate in any of it.
What are the 3 digits on the back of your debit card?
I know, right?
Don't do that. So then I wanted to give a personal experience, just to relate something that technology related that I've experienced over the past week. I have an iMac that a 5K Retina iMac from 2017, I think it is. It might be that has been running Mojave, macOS Mojave, for a long time. When Catalina came out last fall, it was a big jump. All 32-bit apps would stop running. You had to run only 64-bit. I had a couple 32-bit apps, so I was holding off. This is my production machine. I need this machine to make podcasts and to do my work, and I can't afford for it to not work. So I held off, and then I got to the point where I just didn't have time to spend, because I know it takes a couple days to recover from a major upgrade just to get everything smoothed out. And so finally, I was able to do that. Actually, I did it on Holy Saturday because I knew I wasn't going to have any podcasts or work for a couple days, and upgraded it to Catalina, and it went really well. Now, there's always bumps. There's always, over a couple days, things will pop up like, oh, where's that app that's always supposed to be running? Oh, I have to re-enable that. Oh, that thing's looking for a password, or some security setting is wrong on that. And so smoothed it all out. By Monday, when doing podcasts again, all that sort of stuff, it was smooth as butter. So really, really pleased with how well that went. Really happy with that. And I'm really happy with a couple other things that it fixed this long-standing iTunes problem. Now that iTunes is gone, I had this problem. So just a little history. I've had a version of iTunes going back to Sound Jam from Cassidy and Green. That's the original iTunes software was that Apple bought. This goes back to around 2001. Yeah. So my iTunes library was basically upgraded from that for 20 years.
Just after Napster, right?
Maybe somewhere around the same time period, let's say. We won't go into too much detail about why that would be around the same time period. But one of the problems I was having all through Mojave was every time I would launch iTunes, it would ask me for my password, my iCloud password, 5 times in a row for 5 different aspects of the oh my gosh, it would drive me insane. I would avoid iTunes just for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
All gone now. All fixed.
Oh, that's good to know. I haven't upgraded yet, so I'll have to. I'll have to get on that now.
That was good. And the other thing I really like is because it's a relatively new Mac, and I have a very new iPad. I can use Sidecar, which lets me use the iPad as a second screen, or in my case, a third screen, off of my Mac, and it works beautifully. It's flawless. It's better than the third-party functions that I've used before, where like Duet and others, because I've found that you can actually switch out of it, use an app on the iPad, then switch back into it seamlessly. Really nice. Really enjoying that. I've been able to. You'd think with two 7-inch screens that'd be enough. It's not. I can never have enough screen real estate. I've actually been using to put some other things over there as well, so I don't cover things up. So just wanted to relate the upgrade experience to Catalina. Waiting, what is it, 6-8 months afterward has been well worth it. It's stable. They've had enough updates. It's a good experience. So recommend it to folks to give it a try if you haven't yet. But also, if you feel like waiting, it doesn't hurt to wait. All right, so let's move on to our final segment where we talk about our picks of the week. And Pat, I'm going to let you go first. With picks of the week this week.
Oh, well, since I wasn't expecting to be on this particular episode, I have to admit I really don't have a real pick of the week. But let me tell you something that, even though it's been in the news a lot, Zoom has really been a help for family, for friends, for coworkers, for people that I have as clients. And once they got some of their security issues nailed down and let people know what things were helpful for the security, I like Zoom. It's really been very helpful, and it has scaled well considering how huge the growth has been.
I did my first Zoom call on Easter Sunday. We did Zoom with your family. Pat, get to remind folks, Pat is my mother-in-law, so we Zoomed with her family, and we Zoomed with my family. And it was the first time with my family Zoom. I hosted it, so it was the first time for me to host it. And I noticed that the default security settings were set correctly, as we've been talking about in the last few episodes. So I was pleased with that. So that went well. Then what was the other thing? Oh, and speaking of Zoom, the proliferation of Zoom virtual backgrounds has been awesome. So in addition,
it's hilarious.
So DC Comics has a bunch. Like if you want to be sitting in front of Arkham Asylum while you're on your business meeting, the StarTrek.com has a bunch from Star Trek Picard. So if you want to sit in Picard's Chateau Picard's study, his study at the winery in France, Le Bar, you can do that. So I downloaded them all. So it's awesome. That's a lot of fun. So yeah, that's a good pick.
The only drawback to them is if you have more than one person in your session on your side.
Yes.
We had floating heads on in our Zoom because of that.
A few Cheshire family members going in and out. Yes, that was true.
And the other thing you have to be careful for is if you decide you want to have people on separate instruments or devices, you've got to be aware of the audio feed problem where all of a sudden you start getting that echo and shriek of that. So, just hug your partner close when you're there, and then both of you can stay in the picture.
That's right. That's right. All right. So, Thomas, what do you have for a pick of the week?
So in a similar vein, since a lot of people are staying home right now and are trying to keep busy, and you've always wanted to try and broadcast or to stream or something like that, I have picked the Open Broadcaster software, which is, if anybody who's listened to the show for any time knows, I love open source software. And so this is an open source broadcasting software. It can be used to record. I'm using it to record video lessons for my students right now. You can pick all of the video inputs. So you can pick a desktop video input as well as a camera input and overlay them. You can set it all up beforehand so that your picture is where you want it to be. You can move back and forth between them with shortcut keystrokes that don't affect any of the things that you're doing. So if you want to game and have your face visible while you're gaming, you can do that. You can also stream directly from the software. So you can set up a stream and you just put a URL link out and people can follow that URL, and that will allow you to stream. Now you do have to have some background on how you're going to set up the stream and how you're going to get people connected to it, but it works out pretty well. I have loved it. I think it's a fantastic way to record video really quickly. I love the ability to just do shortcut keys to switch between my face talking to someone and then me watching, me doing something on my desktop and then being able to see me still working on it. And the kids have had a really positive response to it too.
Awesome. Yeah, it's open source. Like you said, Windows, Mac, Linux, and you can live stream with it. And that's...
I will say, as a Linux user who is a complete masochist and uses Arch Linux, which means I have to build like everything from the ground up. It was a really easy install, connected with all of my stuff very in a very straightforward way. It doesn't make any assumptions, so there is some level of you having to go in and like tell it exactly what you want it to be doing. But that's great in my opinion, because then you get complete control over exactly what it's seeing and where and when and how.
Cool. And it will stream to the usual suspects, Facebook,
yes,
and YouTube.
Yeah, Facebook,
and
Twitch.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. That's really neat. All right. So then my pick of the week is a piece of software that's for Mac and iOS. And this kind of goes along with Pat, you mentioned about amateur historians of a sort. I've seen some archivists and librarians and historians encouraging people, asking them that in this unprecedented time we're living, keep a journal, keep a diary. Diaries are important sources for historical information, more so than even just news articles or official government records. Diaries give a flavor of what it's like for a regular person to live through a time. Revolutionary War diaries and letters that people sent are invaluable insights into what it was like for people during the Revolutionary War, for instance. One diary software, excellent diary software, journaling software that I recommend that I use myself is called Day One for Mac and iOS. There's a free level, and then there's various subscription levels that give you more and more features, and that it's secure. You can put it behind AES 256 encryption. Sorry, I was struggling for the word encryption. And it's so it's securely encrypted. It's blind. Like they don't have the key. The Day One folks don't have the key. If you lose your password, you're toast. So don't lose your password. It's that secure, and it's really nice, and it can do things. It's got some nice bells and whistles, like it can automatically pull in location data, weather data. You can put photos in. It has an API that you can add things remotely. So I have it archive all of my social media posts and all of my Instagram posts. There's thousands of entries of those in there. And you can have multiple at different subscription levels. You can have multiple journals. So instead of having it all in one big place, you can have a work journal and a personal journal and a family historical journal the sort of stuff that you'd be okay with people reading publicly later, and then something that's private where you can talk about your obsession with My Little Pony or something, but well, you don't want anybody to know about that. So I'm not saying it's a friend of mine. Okay. Yeah. So nobody on this podcast is I'm talking about. Anyway. But it's great software. Check it out. But it find some way to keep a journal, even if you get a little analog notebook with a pencil or a pen, and just keep some notes. Your kids will thank you, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, not to mention posterity in general. What was it like for great-granddad in the great pandemic of 2020? So that's my suggestion. All right. So I think that about wraps it up for us. So we'd love to hear from you, your feedback on any of the topics we discussed or any of our picks of the week. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/technology, or the SQPN Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send us an email to technology@sqpn.com. And of course, we'll put links to the various news articles and picks of the week on our show notes at sqpn.com. We do want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Technology, including Martin, Jonathan, Deborah, Julie, and Tony. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Technology and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Be sure that you have subscribed to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or you can find us at the SQPN YouTube channel, where you should hit the bell to get notifications. Until next time, Pat Scott, thank you for joining me at the last minute and sharing the secrets of technology.
Goodbye.
And Thomas Sanjurjo, thank you as well.
Thanks for having me.
Not you, Siri. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Technology on StarQuest.